The first warning came when the night sky over the human colony of Varela turned a deep crimson. Ships, hundreds of them, descended from the clouds like spears of silver light. People screamed, alarms blared, and soldiers scrambled to their stations. Among them was Captain Ilias Kane, a man who had survived more battles than he cared to remember. Yet, this time, something in his gut told him that this was not like any war he had fought before. The invaders were the Arvex, a species humans had only heard about in scattered rumors. They were tall, with flawless skin the color of twilight and eyes like shards of ice. Their leader, however, was not what the human military expected. She was not hidden behind an army of guards or locked away in a fortress. She walked at the front of her soldiers, golden crown gleaming under the red sky, her presence commanding more than just fear. This was Queen Lyara, the ruler of the Arvex Empire, and she looked directly at Elias as if she had known him all her life. The first clash between the two forces was swift and brutal. Energy blasts lit up the desert plains, cutting through metal and flesh alike. Elias led his unit into the fray, taking cover behind broken walls and firing back at the advancing Arvex troops. Yet, even as the battle raged, his eyes kept returning to the Queen. She did not hide from danger. She strode through the chaos, her voice carrying over the sound of war, commanding her soldiers with calm precision. Hours later, the humans were forced to retreat into the ruins at the edge of the colony. Smoke filled the air, and the ground trembled under the weight of approaching Arvex war machines. Elias was exhausted, his armor scorched and his weapon running low on charge. He expected the enemy to finish them off. Instead, silence fell. The faint sound of footsteps approached, measured, deliberate, almost ceremonial. And then he saw her again, standing only a few steps away, her golden crown catching the last light of the dying day. She stopped in front of him, her icy blue eyes scanning his face. There was no gloating smile, no mocking words. She simply studied him as if weighing something in her mind. Then, in a voice that was soft, yet carried the weight of command, she said, "You'll regret this, human." The words struck him harder than any weapon. Before he could respond, she stepped closer and, to his utter shock, wrapped her arms around him in a firm, almost desperate embrace. Elias froze, his weapon still in his hand, his mind trying to process the impossible. The battlefield was still, littered with soldiers, hers and his, but at that moment, all he could feel was the strange warmth of her armor against his chest and the steady rhythm of her breath. Her voice came again, quieter this time, almost as if she didn't want anyone else to hear. "I don't know why," she whispered, "but I had to do this." Around them, her soldiers shifted uneasily, unsure whether to attack or stand down. His own men stared in disbelief, their weapons lowered, but not entirely at rest. The desert wind carried the smell of burned metal and dust. Yet in the space between him and the alien queen, there was something entirely different, something neither war nor hatred could explain. Elias had been in combat for years, but never had he felt such an unshakable certainty that this moment meant more than survival. He didn't move, neither did she. And for the first time since the war began, the battlefield was still. Elias could still feel the weight of her arms around him as the sun dipped below the horizon. The warmth of the embrace clashed with the cold steel of reality. He was a soldier, and she was the enemy. Yet there was no denying that something had shifted in that moment. His instincts told him to pull away, but his body refused to obey. Around them, the battlefield waited, as if the war itself was holding its breath. Queen Lyara stepped back slowly, her eyes never leaving his. There was a strange look in them now, something caught between sorrow and curiosity. "You fight well," she said simply. The words carried no malice, no mocking tone, only truth. Elias wondered if she was testing him or if she truly meant it. Either way, he gave her nothing in return but a steady, unreadable stare. She turned her head slightly, signaling to her soldiers to lower their weapons. The Arvex troops obeyed instantly, their movements disciplined and silent. Elias noticed how each one stood perfectly still, waiting for her next command. It was a kind of loyalty he had rarely seen in human ranks. She walked past him then, as if she expected him to follow. His instincts screamed at him to stay put. But something in her presence drew him forward. His men exchanged uneasy glances but stayed behind, unsure of what was unfolding. She led him toward the ruins at the edge of the battlefield. The setting sun cast long shadows over shattered walls and broken towers. In the distance, smoke curled upward into the darkening sky. Her footsteps were light, almost soundless, yet every step carried authority. Elias matched her pace, his weapon still at his side but no longer raised. Whatever game she was playing, she had him in it now. And though he hated to admit it, he wanted to know where it would lead. They stopped at what had once been a great hall. Now it was little more than rubble, with a few standing columns and a cracked stone floor. She turned to face him again. "You think I came here to conquer your people," she said. "That is only partly true." The statement made his jaw tighten. Partly true? What else could it be? His eyes narrowed as he waited for her to continue, but she only studied him as though trying to read something hidden beneath his skin. "You are different," she said finally. "I knew it the moment I saw you." Her voice was calm but carried an edge of urgency. Elias felt a surge of irritation. He had no patience for cryptic games in the middle of a war. "I'm just a soldier," he replied flatly. She shook her head once, almost sadly. "No, you are something far more dangerous." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and deliberate. Before he could speak again, a sudden explosion shattered the silence. A human strike team had launched an attack. On the Arvex flank, their gunfire ripping through the quiet like a blade. Lyra's soldiers moved instantly, forming a defensive line. Elias stepped back, his instincts flaring, but she raised a hand to halt him. "Go," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Protect your men." Her command was so firm that for a moment he almost obeyed without question. He ran back toward his unit, the noise of battle swelling around him. His men were pinned down behind a collapsed wall, firing at Arvex troops who had returned to full combat. The air burned with the smell of plasma fire and scorched metal. As he took cover beside them, he caught a glimpse of Lyra in the distance, standing tall among her soldiers. She was directing them, but her eyes flicked toward him more than once, as if making sure he was still alive. Elias fired into the advancing enemy, his mind torn between the fight and the strange connection that had formed with the alien queen. It was madness. He had no reason to trust her, and yet he could not shake the feeling that she knew something he didn't. Something that could change everything about this war. And for reasons he could not name, he needed to find out what it was. The battle dragged on into the night, and the once bright desert was now lit only by the flashes of weapons fire. Elias moved between positions, shouting orders and returning fire where he could. His mind stayed sharp, but somewhere in the back of it, the image of Queen Lyra standing among her soldiers refused to fade. She was not hiding in a command tent or watching from safety. She was there, in the chaos like she belonged to it. When the fighting eased for a moment, Elias ducked behind a half-destroyed barricade. One of his men, Sergeant Harlan, looked at him with wide eyes. "What happened out there, Captain? Why didn't she kill you?" Elias didn't have an answer that would make sense. He could barely explain it to himself. The only thing he knew was that she could have ended him with a single command, but she chose not to. That choice bothered him more than if she had pulled the trigger herself. Their radio crackled with a warning from command. The Arvex were pulling back from the front lines, but not retreating. Something else was happening, and they were regrouping for it. Elias glanced across the ruins and spotted the Queen again. She was moving away from the fight entirely, heading toward the far end of the old hall they had passed earlier. It wasn't a retreat. It was purposeful, and she didn't look back once. Against his better judgment, Elias decided to follow her. He moved quietly, keeping to the shadows, his weapon ready. Every step took him farther from his unit and deeper into the ruins. The sounds of battle grew distant, replaced by the low hum of Arvik's machinery. The Queen entered a chamber lit by faint blue light spilling from strange alien panels set into the walls. It looked more like a temple than a war room. She stopped in the center of the room, her back still turned to him. "You are persistent," she said without turning around. Elias froze in place. Her voice carried easily in the stillness, as though the walls themselves were listening. "You shouldn't be here," she added, and yet there was no threat in her tone. If anything, it sounded almost like concern. He stepped forward cautiously, his boots scraping against the cracked stone floor. "What are you doing here?" he asked, keeping his weapon low but ready. She finally turned to face him, her eyes catching the soft blue light in a way that made them almost glow. "I came here long before this battle," she said. "This place is older than your colony, older than my empire." Elias felt a shiver run through him. If she was telling the truth, then the ruins were more than just rubble. They were something both sides had overlooked until now. She walked slowly toward a raised platform at the back of the chamber. On it sat an object unlike anything Elias had ever seen. It was a metallic sphere, covered in faintly glowing markings. "This is why I'm here," she said. "And this is why I can't let you die." The words hit him harder than any weapon could. She had spoken of him like his survival was tied to whatever was happening in this place. Before he could ask more, the walls trembled. A deep, echoing rumble filled the chamber. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the blue lights on the walls flickered. Lyra's eyes widened, not in fear, but in realization. "They found it," she said sharply. "And they'll destroy us both to get it." Elias's instincts kicked in, and he moved to cover her without thinking. His weapon was raised, and his eyes scanned the entrance for threats. Through the archway, a group of armed figures appeared. They weren't Arvik soldiers, and they weren't human. Their armor was black, their movements precise and predatory. Elias had never seen their kind before, but the way Liara stepped in front of him told him all he needed to know. These were enemies to both of them. For a moment, they stood back to back, the human and the alien queen, ready to fight as one. In that instant, Elias understood something. This war was bigger than his people versus hers. Something else was pulling the strings, and whatever it was had just walked through that doorway. Asterisk. The black-armored soldiers moved into the chamber with the precision of hunters. Their weapons were sleek and sharp, glowing faintly with a pale red light. Elias tightened his grip on his rifle, his eyes scanning for any opening. Queen Liara stood firm beside him, her hand resting lightly on the hilt of a curved alien blade. The air between them was heavy with the unspoken understanding that neither could win this fight alone. The leader of the intruders stepped forward. His helmet was shaped like the head of a predator, and his voice was cold when he spoke. "The relic belongs to us," he said. Elias had no idea who these people were, but the way Lyra's eyes narrowed told him she knew exactly what they wanted. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she shifted her stance, subtly putting herself between Elias and the sphere on the platform. "They won't leave here alive," she murmured, just loud enough for him to hear. Elias didn't need more convincing. The first shot came from the enemy, a bolt of red energy that scorched the stone where he had been standing a second earlier. He rolled aside and returned fire, the sound of his rifle filling the chamber. Liara moved with deadly grace, her blade flashing in the blue light as she cut down the first attacker who came within reach. The fight was fast and brutal. Elias fired in controlled bursts, each shot finding its mark. Lyra's movements were a blur of precision, her strikes ending enemies before they could even raise their weapons. Yet for every one they brought down, another seemed to take their place. The enemy leader pressed forward, his weapon raised, but Elias intercepted him with a shot that shattered the glowing core on his chest plate. The leader staggered back, but he didn't fall. Instead, he roared and lunged at Elias. They collided hard, the impact sending them both to the ground. Elias fought to keep the man's weapon away from him, their struggle echoing through the chamber. Just as the enemy was about to overpower him, Lyra's blade pierced the soldier's side. The man went rigid, his weapon falling from his hands. Before he collapsed, the remaining soldiers hesitated, and in that moment of uncertainty, Lyra spoke in a voice that carried pure command. "Leave now or join him." Her words cut through the tension like a blade. The intruders looked at one another, then began to back away. None of them turned their back until they had crossed the threshold of the chamber, disappearing into the shadows beyond the ruins. Elias pulled himself to his feet, his breath ragged. "You could have let them take it," he said, gesturing toward the sphere. Lyra shook her head, her expression unreadable. "If they had it, your world and mine would be ashes within days." Elias didn't doubt her. Whatever that object was, it carried a weight that went far beyond this war. He felt the pull of it even from across the room, a strange hum in the air that seemed to reach inside him. Lyra approached the sphere and rested her hand lightly on its surface. The markings flared brighter at her touch, and Elias saw symbols, shifting and changing as though alive. "It responds to you," he said quietly. She glanced at him, and for a moment he thought she might deny it. Instead, she said, "It responds to both of us." The meaning in her voice was clear, and it made his pulse quicken. Before either of them could speak again, a distant rumble shook the ruins. Dust drifted from the ceiling, and the sound of engines grew louder. Lyra's face hardened. "Your army is coming," she said. Elias knew she was right. The sound wasn't Arvik's, it was the deep, familiar roar of human assault ships. They were closing in fast, and they would not stop to ask questions. Elias looked at her, then at the sphere. He didn't know why, but he was certain that letting his own people take it would be as dangerous as leaving it to the intruders. In that moment, he made a decision that would change everything. The roar of the approaching human ships grew louder until it seemed to shake the very air. Elias knew his people would come in hard, weapons primed and orders clear. Secure the area, eliminate any alien threat, and retrieve anything of value. Lyra's presence would not be questioned, only targeted. The sphere would not be studied, only claimed. He glanced at her, and she was already looking at him, as if reading his thoughts. "We don't have time," she said firmly. Her hand still rested on the sphere, the strange markings pulsing in response to her touch. Elias could feel the urgency building inside him, a sense that if they stayed even a moment longer, the situation would spiral beyond control. "If they take it, neither of us will survive what comes next," she added. He believed her without needing proof. Something about the sphere felt alive, and whatever it held was not meant for just anyone. Elias made his choice. "We move it," he said. Lyra's eyes narrowed slightly, as if measuring the weight of his decision. She stepped back and let him approach. As soon as his hands touched the sphere, a wave of heat surged through his arms and into his chest. The markings shifted again, glowing brighter, and for a moment he swore he could hear whispers, alien, distant, yet somehow familiar. Lyra's gaze sharpened, but she said nothing. They worked quickly, lifting the sphere together. It was heavier than it looked, yet it moved smoothly in their grip, almost as if it wanted to be carried. The sound of the engines was now joined by the distant thud of troop carriers hitting the ground. Elias led the way out of the chamber, moving through the ruins with practiced caution. Lyra stayed close, her eyes flicking constantly to the shadows for threats. As they reached the outer wall, the first of the human troops came into view. They advanced in tight formation, rifles raised, scanning for enemies. One soldier spotted Elias and called out. Relief flashed across their faces, but it faded quickly when they saw the alien queen beside him. Several weapons lifted immediately. Targeting her, stand down. Elias shouted, but his voice was met with hesitation. His men knew him, but orders from command could outweigh trust. Liara did not flinch under the aim of human weapons. Her posture remained regal, her chin high. The sphere still cradled between her hands and his. If they fire, the sphere will be lost, she said quietly, so only he could hear. Elias stepped forward, placing himself partly in front of her. She's not the threat here, he said loudly to his men. We've got bigger problems. But before any reply could come, the ground shook again. From the opposite side of the ruins, a familiar hum rose in pitch. Black armored soldiers, the same kind that had attacked earlier, were closing in fast. Their numbers had doubled, and they carried heavier weapons. The human troops shifted uneasily, realizing they were caught between two enemies. Elias saw the moment of recognition on their faces. If they fought the Arviks and these intruders at once, they wouldn't last long. Make a choice, Captain, Liara said sharply. Fight me or fight them, the answer came without hesitation. We fight them, Elias replied. He barked orders to his men, directing them into defensive positions that covered both him and Liara. The first shots rang out, and the battlefield exploded into chaos. Plasma fire lit the darkening sky as human and Arvik's forces fought side by side against the black-armored attackers. Elias moved like a man possessed, cutting down enemies that broke through the lines. Liara's blade was a blur beside him, each strike precise and lethal. The sphere pulsed in the corner of his vision, almost as if reacting to the battle itself. The more they fought, the stronger the glow became. It was as though the object fed on conflict, drawing energy from the clash around it. By the time the last black-armored soldier fell, the ruins were littered with the dead. Human soldiers lowered their weapons, their eyes still wary but no longer aimed at Liara. The queen straightened, her gaze sweeping the battlefield before returning to Elias. Now you see why this cannot fall into the wrong hands, she said. Elias nodded, his mind already racing toward what had to come next. The soldiers gathered in a tense circle while the dust settled. Human medics moved between the fallen, and Arvik's healers did the same with quiet focus. Elias stood with the sphere, still in his hands, feeling its faint pulse travel up his arms. Liara faced him with steady eyes, as if waiting for him to speak first. He drew a slow breath and nodded because the choice ahead was clear. We cannot hold this place, Elias said in a calm voice. More of those black-armored units will come. He looked toward the horizon where the last trails of smoke faded into the night. The ruins offered no cover if heavy weapons returned. The sphere hummed again, brighter for a heartbeat, as if agreeing with him. Liara turned to her nearest captain and gave a simple order to prepare for movement. Human command finally broke through on the radio and demanded a report. Voices crackled with suspicion when they learned the queen was beside him. Elias kept his words simple and strict because any debate would waste time. He said there was a third enemy and that the relic was too dangerous for open conflict. The line went quiet before a hard reply warned him that he would be held responsible for any decision he made. Liara watched him finish the call without changing her expression. Your leaders do not trust me, she said. Her tone was level, not offended and not surprised. Elias answered that trust must be earned in the field. She inclined her head once, as if that rule fit her own culture as well. Then she pointed toward the broken ridge and told him there was a canyon road that could hide their convoy. They moved as a single column shaped by necessity. Human transports took the wounded, and Arvik's walkers formed a guard on the flanks. The night air was cool and carried the smell of dry stone. The sphere rested between Elias and Liara in a shock cradle, yet its glow pushed through the fabric like moonlight underwater. Every time the convoy hit a bump, the markings shifted and traced new lines across the metal skin. Halfway down the canyon, gunfire cracked from the cliffs. A hidden squad of black-armored shooters opened fire with clean bursts. Elias jumped from the lead truck and signaled a staggered defense. Human snipers took high points while Arvik scouts scaled the rock like they were born to it. The ambushers tried to reposition, but the mixed unit pressed them fast and clean. When the shooting stopped, the cliff went silent again. Liara joined Elias beside the wrecked enemy gear. She knelt and pried open a rifle core while sparks danced against her gloves. "Not mercenaries," she said. "Not common raiders." Elias studied the smooth internal design and the strange mineral in the power cell. He had never seen human alloys shaped like that. He had never seen Arvik's shapes either. Liara closed the core and said the truth neither of them wanted to speak aloud. "Their masters woke before our empires were born," she said. "This relic is part of their chain." Elias looked back at the sphere and felt a chill slide through his chest. If the relic linked to an older power, it might explain the pull he felt and the way it answered both of them. He asked where they had to go if they wanted answers instead of battles. Liara turned her face to the dark mouth of the canyon and named a place called Solace Crater. The map showed Solace Crater as a scar 3 hours away over hard ground. Human pilots argued for airlift, but Elias refused because the relic drew attention. Every time it rose above cover, they rolled on wheels and legs, lights dim, engines low, formation tight and patient. The night grew colder, and faint frost kissed the edges of the windshield. When the stars cleared, the sphere brightened like a small sun hidden under a cloak. Near the final ridge, the convoy halted while scouts checked the basin. The crater lay quiet, ringed by black glass and old impact stone. In the center stood a structure half buried by ash, shaped like a crown with teeth of metal. Liara stepped down first and waited for Elias to join her. Together they carried the sphere across the cooling ground while both armies formed a wary circle at their backs. Inside the crown structure, the floor opened into a shallow bowl cut with channels. Old glyphs glowed when the sphere crossed the threshold. Elias felt the pull again, stronger now, like a door asking to be opened. Liara placed one hand over his and guided the sphere down into the central socket. The markings across its surface aligned with the channels, and the entire room drew a single shimmering breath. The air inside the crown structure shimmered as the sphere locked into place. Light poured through the carved channels, racing along the floor and climbing the walls. Elias stepped back on instinct, his rifle still in hand, though it felt meaningless against whatever was awakening here. Liara did not move away. Her gaze stayed fixed on the sphere as though she had been waiting for this moment her entire life. The light gathered above the sphere, forming a shifting column of symbols. They were neither human nor Arvik's in origin, yet Elias felt a strange recognition in them, like the meaning was buried deep in his mind. Liara began to speak in a low, steady tone, reciting words that matched the changing shapes. Her voice carried a weight that made the soldiers on the edge of the room fall silent. A sudden pulse spread outward, making the stone floor tremble. Elias felt the vibration in his bones. The sphere's markings changed again, this time locking into a stable pattern. Liara's hand tightened slightly on the edge of the socket, and she looked at him with a sharp focus. "It knows you," she said. The certainty in her tone made the words land heavier than a command. Elias didn't know how to answer because she was right. Before he could speak, a shadow fell over the entrance. Black-armored soldiers were back, but this time they moved with more purpose. They didn't fire immediately. Instead, they fanned out, blocking the exit. Their leader stepped forward, helmet tilting as if studying both Elias and Liara. "Step away from the relic," he ordered. His voice was calm, too calm for someone standing in the middle of armed enemies. Lyra's eyes flicked to Elias, and he caught the message without words. They couldn't surrender the sphere, but they also couldn't fire in here without risking the structure. Elias kept his rifle aimed but didn't shoot. "You'll have to kill us," he said evenly. The leader's silence stretched before he gestured to his men, and they advanced in perfect unison. The air thickened with the certainty of another fight. The first attacker moved in close, aiming for Elias's weapon. Elias sidestepped and struck with the rifle stock, sending the soldiers stumbling back. Lyra's blade flashed, intercepting another who lunged for the sphere. The confined space turned the fight into a blur of close strikes and quick shots. Every impact sent ripples of light racing through the floor, as if the relic itself was reacting to the violence. Elias ducked under a blow and drove his shoulder into an opponent, knocking him into one of the glowing channels. The soldier convulsed as the light flared brighter, then collapsed. Lyra seized the moment, slashing her way through two more before spinning to guard the sphere again. "It's feeding on this," she said between breaths. Elias realized she was right. The glow wasn't weakening, it was growing stronger with every strike. The enemy leader saw it too. He barked an order, and his troops fell back toward the entrance, their retreat precise and controlled. Elias held his fire, unwilling to risk damaging the sphere. Lyra stepped forward, but stopped when the leader raised one hand in warning. "This is only the beginning," he said. Then he and his soldiers melted into the darkness beyond the doorway, leaving silence behind. The light from the sphere softened, but it didn't fade entirely. Elias turned to Lyra, his chest still heaving. "They'll be back," he said. She nodded once, her eyes on the glowing object. "And next time, they won't come alone." Her words carried no fear, only certainty. Around them, the combined human and Arvik soldiers shifted uneasily, unsure if they had just won or merely delayed something far worse. Elias stepped closer to the sphere, studying the steady glow of its markings. The pull he felt earlier was stronger now, as if it recognized him not just as an observer, but as part of its purpose. Lyra joined him, her voice low but firm. "If we leave it here, they'll find it. If we take it, the hunt will never stop." Elias met her gaze and knew she was telling the truth. Elias stood in the quiet chamber, his hand brushing against the cool surface of the sphere. Every instinct told him that keeping it was dangerous, but leaving it behind would be worse. Lyra stepped closer, her expression unreadable yet steady. "If we take it, we bind our fates," she said. Her tone carried no hesitation, as though she had already accepted that truth long before this day. The soldiers outside waited for orders, but none moved until Elias spoke. He told them the mission had changed, that the sphere was now under joint protection. There were uneasy glances and a few murmurs, yet no one openly challenged him. Lyra gave a single nod to her captains, and the Arvik's troops fell into position alongside the humans. For the first time, the two forces stood together without their weapons aimed at one another. They moved out of the crater slowly, every step careful. The relic was cradled between Elias and Lyra, its glow casting pale light across their faces. The night air was cold, carrying the scent of burned stone from the earlier battles. Above them, the stars seemed sharper, as if the world itself was watching their every move. Elias kept scanning the horizon for movement, knowing the black-armored enemy would not give up so easily. Halfway to the ridge, a faint hum touched the air. It wasn't the deep roar of ships or the static of radio chatter. It was something older, something that resonated in the chest rather than the ears. Lyra slowed, her eyes narrowing. "It's calling to something," she said. Elias didn't ask what. He simply tightened his grip on the sphere and picked up the pace, knowing they needed distance before that sound brought trouble. At the top of the ridge, They halted to survey the path ahead. The canyon beyond was quiet, shadows stretching long across the ground. Elias ordered the column forward, keeping their formation tight. His men followed without question now, and the Arviks matched their steps. For a brief moment, there was no sense of two armies, only one group moving under the same unspoken goal. That unity felt fragile but real. When they reached the mouth of the canyon, a figure stepped into their path. It was the leader of the black-armored soldiers standing alone. His weapon was lowered, but his stance carried no peace. "You can't run from what it is," he said. His voice was calmer than before, almost resigned. Elias raised his rifle, but the man didn't flinch. Liara stepped in front of the sphere, her presence a shield between it and their enemy. The man's gaze shifted between them before he spoke again. "When it awakens fully, you won't control it. It will control you." Elias didn't answer. He had no intention of debating the warning, not here and not now. Instead, he gave the signal, and the soldiers began moving again. The man didn't follow. He simply stood in the shadows, watching them pass, until the canyon walls hid him from sight. They pressed on until the horizon began to pale with the first light of morning. The glow from the sphere dimmed slightly, as though the sunlight quieted its energy. Elias could feel the tension easing in the soldiers, but he knew it was only temporary. Liara walked beside him in silence, her eyes fixed ahead. "There will be no safe place," she finally said. "Only places where they take longer to find us." He understood and accepted it. By the time they reached the outskirts of neutral territory, both armies were exhausted. Camps were set, guards posted, and the wounded tended. Elias sat by the sphere, his thoughts circling the events that had brought them here. Liara joined him, her voice low. "You saved it," she said, "or it saved you." Elias looked at her, unsure which was true. Perhaps both were. Perhaps the truth no longer mattered. In the days that followed, humans and Arviks began working side by side, training together and sharing resources. The black-armored soldiers did not appear again, but their absence felt like the pause before a storm. Elias knew they would return when the time was right. Liara seemed certain of it too. Yet for now, the relic was safe, and with it, the strange alliance that had formed between them. And in the quiet moments between orders and watch shifts, Elias still remembered the way she had embraced him on the battlefield, and how it had changed everything.